Everyone talks about leaving the relationship, but nobody talks about the part after, the part where your body still reaches for someone your mind knows now was never safe, where you wake up and feel them in a room even though they're gone, and where the fantasy feels heavier than the truth. This is not weakness, this is grief, not for the person, but the version of them your nervous system is attached to, the one that thought it felt like home, but it was just hurt. I'm Meaghan Webster, an abuse recovery coach, a trauma-informed strategist, and the woman a narcissist hopes to never meet twice. This is the Narcissist Worst Nightmare podcast, where you learn how to break the trauma bond, heal your nervous system, and rebuild a life you love after a toxic or abusive relationship. This episode is going to speak on the grief that nobody prepares you for, the one that you experience not when the person is gone, but when the illusion actually breaks. The breakup that you went through was not just a breakup, it was an awakening, and a painful one at that, because you were not losing a partner, you were losing the future you believed that you had. I want to be super clear about something. Your love was real. Your loyalty was real. Your feelings were real. Your intentions were real. Your hope was real, and your emotional investment was real. The part that wasn't real was the person you attached all of that to. Women inside of the RRR membership often ask the same question once they step in the doors: what was real and what was fake? They torment themselves replaying every moment, conversation, loving gesture, every promise, but the answer is super simple. Everything you felt was real. Everything they performed was not. The beginning was not truth, it was strategy. Their tenderness was imitation, their presence was leverage, their intensity was bait, their connection was performance, and their promises were manipulation. The person at the end, that's the real one. The person at the beginning wears the mask. You didn't fall in love with them, you fell in love with the version that they played. Your grief is not about the loss of a partner. It is about the death of a story that you built around them. Trying to figure out what was real becomes psychological torture. Your mind tries to protect you, finding meaning, patterns, or proof that at least parts of it mattered. But the beginning was designed to make you attach very quickly and very deeply. Their vulnerability, their confessions, their intensity, their emotions, their availability, it was curated. And once you understand that and accept it, the confusion starts to ease. Not because it hurts any less, but because the truth finally gets to take shape. Nothing about how you felt or your experience was false. Nothing about their behavior was genuine. A trauma bond feels like an addiction, not metaphorically, literally. Your nervous system becomes conditioned to that cycle. Your body reacts to the highs and lows. Your brain becomes dependent on the patterns. The inconsistency becomes the rush. The reconciliation becomes the relief. And the unpredictability becomes the chemistry. This is why leaving feels like a withdrawal, because it is. You are not missing the person. You are missing the chemical loop. The temporary relief followed by the chaos. And you missed the beginning the most because it gave your system the hit it had once been conditioned to crave. And this is where part of my own story lives. My moment of truth was not dramatic. It wasn't during a fight. It wasn't during the chaos. It was quiet. I had just gone through another round of the same pattern, another argument that was twisted reality, another apology built on absolutely nothing. Another moment where I realized I had lost more of myself. I was sitting on the floor with my back to the door of the room, and I couldn't explain why I was so exhausted. It wasn't emotional exhaustion. It was my nervous system shutting down. And a thought dropped into my mind that changed a lot of things for me. I actually don't want the beginning back. For so long, the beginning was the thing that I kept trying to resurrect, to fight for, to justify everything that had happened. And in that silence, I realized I actually didn't want any of it. Not the illusion, not the fantasy, not the intensity, not the emotional hits, and certainly not the grief that was coming through. That for me was a realization that really broke the initial trauma bond, because it didn't feel like magic anymore. It felt purely like manipulation, like my eyes had been opened for the first time. And that was the moment that I knew I would never return to that version of myself who continued to beg for the beginning. The beginning of a relationship with a narcissist or an abuser is a hook. The middle is the unraveling, and the end is the actual truth. Your nervous system is bonded to the beginning mask, your heart attached to the fantasy, and your mind kept trying to reconcile both. And this is why the grief hit so hard. You're releasing a life that you imagined, a relationship you thought you had but didn't exist. You were loyal to a performance. You were committed to an illusion. And you were fighting for something that only you believed in. That is why it hurt. This type of grief actually strikes at your identity because it isn't just the relationship ending, it's the collapse of the version of who you believed in it. You lose the love that you imagined, the safety, the partnership, the future, and the version of you that was growing inside of it. Which is why it feels like death, because on some levels it is. You are burying the story that you lived inside. I had a client when she joined the RR membership, she was really confused at the depths of her grief. Not because she wanted him back, but because she could not understand why it felt so heavy. She said things like, I miss the connection, I miss the emotional intensity, I miss the tenderness that he showed me in the beginning. But every part of her logically knew he was not good for her. What she didn't want to realize was this. She wasn't longing for him, the person. She was longing for the version of herself who she was at the beginning before the abuse. The version of her who believed the relationship could be real, who believed the connection was mutual, that the tenderness meant something, who believed she finally found someone who understood her. And her turning point was when she started to pause, to stay long enough in her body to really feel the truth. In that space, she realized everything she was missing was her own emotional depth reflected back at her, not his. She was not grieving the man. She was grieving the possibility and the potential she had built around him. And once that landed, her grief transformed, not into anger, not into numbness, into a very crystal clear picture of seeing herself again. Getting clear ended the illusion for her. And when the illusion collapses, something unexpected happens inside of you. There is a stillness that wasn't available before, a pause, a moment where the noise stops long enough for you to recognize that that relationship never allowed you to see. You meet a part of yourself that remained intact through everything. The part that cared without manipulation, that showed up with sincerity, that held compassion even when the relationship offered none. The part that stayed emotionally honest in an environment built on distortion. That is when the realization settles and your grief begins to change shape. It stops surrounding the relationship and it actually starts to begin revealing your strength. A strength that you didn't have the language for at the time. And your grief gets to be a doorway, not to the past, but to self-recognition, to a deeper understanding of how much you brought to a dynamic that was never capable of valuing it. This is where your identity shift happens, where you start to feel yourself returning to the center of your own life, where the emotional clarity becomes stronger than the memory of the illusion, where the relationship that happened stops defining you, where the abuse is no longer at the forefront, but the woman who rises here is not harder. She is honest with herself and her needs and her vision for her life. She becomes someone whose inner world is no longer shaped by somebody else's performance. And at this point, you have an opportunity to create a life rooted in reality instead of survival, where emotional depth becomes a gift and not a burden, where your standards come from self-respect, not desperation, and where you get to choose connections that align with who you are becoming, not who you had to be to survive them. This is where the illusion ends and where you begin again. If this episode cracks something open for you, good. That means you're waking up. Share this with the woman who needs it. Hit follow so you never miss the next one. Send me a DM on Instagram and tell me what landed hardest for you. And when you are ready to fully heal the trauma bond, rebuild your identity, and rise into the woman you were meant to be through your grieving windows, please join us inside of the RRR membership. This is the Narcissist Worst Nightmare podcast. And remember, grief lives in your body and can become a doorway to your healing when you uncover, discover, and discard the abuse that happened to you so you can learn how to live freely now.